Okay, so I think let's get started. We're at time, and I'm sure I'll be kicked off the stage at 2:45, so let's make use of the time. So, so a little bit about myself. I work for a company called E2open. We were founded some 18, 19 years ago. It was called Enterprise to Open. Interesting name, I thought when I joined the company. So my experience, just to give a little bit of an introduction. So I've been with the company for about 9.5 years, which is, I think, more than 50% of my career overall. I lead the solutions consulting team, so it's basically companies such as yourself helping you to kind of solve your big supply chain problems. It's a very interesting job because it keeps me on my toes, because consumer products or technology, industrial manufacturing, retail, they're all so different. So I have a good time. So I've worked, I'm mostly coming from a planning background. But E2open was not a planning company when I joined that company. So the first 5 years I was working on forecasting and planning type of software, implementing software. And then in the last 4 or 5 years, I've gone closer also to the execution side of things, right? And I think as we know as supply chain professionals, planning and execution, channel and supply, it's all different ball games. So what I'm going to try and do today is talk a little bit about how I think, or how E2open thinks, and maybe share some examples in terms of what we've done with some customers. As to what the future looks like, right? I mean, not long ago we used to say supply chains of 2020, and now we are here. So the future is here, so to speak, right? So I'm going to look at, a little bit about what's happening now, but also how I think things are changing. 20 years ago, I think our lives were a lot different. We still had email. Email was new as well. I remember, not even 10 years ago, I was in Pittsburgh. I did my master's there at Carnegie Mellon. We were going to Washington, D.C., and we didn't trust the GPS, right? This is 2008. No way. I don't trust. And one of my friends, he was like, okay, we were in grad school. So he's like, oh, I don't trust GPS auntie, because it's like it's a female voice over there. So we went to, we were in grad school, right? So we bought this from a petrol station, from the gas stations, and then we kind of followed the route, and then it took us 6 hours to reach from Pittsburgh to D.C., which is about a 4-hour drive. I would never imagine doing that now. So even in 10 years, things have changed, and of course, we don't even need to go back to this one. And people, probably half the people don't know here, right, what this is. But yeah, this is also a device, something that helps you navigate. So I say that. But yeah, now I have a real-time feel of where I am. You can fool this as well, right? Did you guys see that viral video where somebody was dragging along a cart, and it had 100 phones in there? So they essentially simulated a traffic jam. So you can fool every system in the world, right? But it still helps. And so, yeah, technology does change the way we interact with the world, right? So that was my point. If we now look at what's happening in the companies like you, what we do today, we still need to bring goods to the customer, right? But it's gone more challenging. You have this traditional brick and mortar channels. You have other channels. You have an online channel. You have indirect distribution. You have maybe direct channels. But there's also more products now, more players in the game, 3PLs, 4PLs. But the challenges remain. If there's an out of stock, you lose mind share, you lose market share. But in the new Amazon world, I may want to look for it online, and if I see that the delivery time is 4 weeks, I'm not going to make an order. So supply chains are essentially becoming the force in which you compete in the market, right? It's no longer just the back office operations. So supply chain leaders are finding their way up to the C-level as well, right? But in any case, right, there's also other things going on. So we have this coronavirus, right? It came out of the blue. I didn't even put that in my presentation when I signed it. But there are pressures which companies have to face. Some of them you can foresee. Okay, maybe you have a fiscal season, you have a Super Bowl, or you have a World Cup final. But some of them you cannot, right? And the whole setup is around how can you then act in this quite a volatile, quite a complex market, driven by not just complexity coming in from your SKUs and your channels, but maybe external pressures. There's activist investors. We know about WTO and what's happening with the trade wars. Climate change, let's not forget, right? It's one of the big issues of our times. What does all this really mean? I mean, if you look at what happens, there are many sources of complexity, which means that businesses have to be faster, more agile, respond more profitably to problems, and also be have more foresight in terms of anticipating things, what they could face, right? So the interesting thing is there are a couple of themes there, right? You need to be close to your customer, or maybe your customer's customer, sometimes even more further. You need to understand what's driving true demand. Most of supply chain activities happen today beyond your four walls. That's one theme, right? And how can you control that? And are the technology systems? Remember, my talk is about how technology intersects with supply chain, really. And there are so much of these things. And in a lot of our companies, we're still trying to bridge functional silos, right? I mean, demand works different from supply, for instance. There's an IT angle to it. There are legacy systems, right? There's one system which does one box, and then you connect it all together via pipes and somehow try to kind of solve an end-to-end problem. But the whole problem is that we're living in a world which is we expect it to be very fast, but we may not necessarily have the organization, the technology, and the processes to handle that. But I think all of us know this, right? So what's new? The fun fact is, even with all the effort that we put in, all these discussions we have had, I've had some good discussions with you guys over here, and I'm working with also a few of you guys. So if you look at profit margins, this is over almost, 25-year period. They've increased. It's not like nothing's happening. Of course, we had a big dip in the recession. Last 10 years, maybe last 15 years, hardly any increase. The fun fact is also on the inventory side. If you look at this by industry, maybe it's a bit small. But if you look at the inventory we have had, it's steadily rising. So we're essentially, with this complexity, how are we trying to cover for it? We're trying to essentially build buffers everywhere, right? Or we are trying to somehow manage it, react to it. Don't forget also that these are also inventory is it's like piles of carbon, piles of water. For any sustainability initiative you really drive, you have to think about inventory. So what's businesses? This is a long time ago, right? Ford had a plant like this. They had a power plant right in the factory. So full vertical integration. There's everything that you need to produce goods. You had it right there, right? This was the old days. In some ways, it was simpler, even though they were doing a lot more, versus today we see more orchestration, right? We see brand owners. So you own the brand, but most of the times you have a huge disparate, or let's say a multi-tier system to get your goods out and distribute them out, right? So here's an example from a customer of ours, Boeing. Now, I was at a Boeing, assembly line some time ago, and you could see that, plane comes in the morning, or the parts come in from one end, and then, at the end of the line, there's a fully manufactured 787 that comes out, right? At the end of the day. So what has to happen to make that happen? You need to have the right parts, be present at the right time, in order to do that. Because if the production line stops, you have one less 787. And you can see what's the cost of these beasts. So the fun part is also that it's become completely different. The supply chains are more distributed. In some ways, you don't have control over that anymore so much, right? If you have a distributed supply chain, you have different challenges than what Ford used to have 40 years or 50 years from now, right? So just this is not a real company, I have to say. Because we are trying to represent all the different nodes that might happen. But think of also ecosystems now, right? Because so heavily distributed environments. You have supply or supplier ecosystems. You have distribution or channel ecosystems, and you have things in between. You have, of course, it's your planning, your purchasing, all that. But there's also logistics ecosystems, 3PLs in the mix. There's also governments, right? There's cross-border activity going around here. So governments have rules and regulations. You have to comply with laws, trade laws, exports, imports. There are multiple points of failure in today's supply chains, right? So if you think about running a business with these points, and this is what you have to manage today. And of course, you could have multiple issues. You may have production delays. You may have to expedite. You may have a port congestion because you cannot load your goods. But even at the last mile, you may have traffic jam, right? So it's just, we talk about last mile delivery and everything, but how many companies really have control of the whole ecosystem? Think of now a disruption. It's completely different, right? So you could have a disruption. The most obvious way to think about it is just noise. I mean, what if a truck is late? I mean, should you care? Truck is late, but maybe you have enough stock, right? Or maybe it doesn't impact your final promise to the customer. Maybe in that case, you're fine. So you essentially need to correlate what's happening in here, here, and here to maybe what you can promise to the customer, right? Essentially in one sense. If you think of now, just represented in terms of supply chain processes, so 4 supply chain processes, right? I picked them up because I read an article somewhere. Right? So these are 4 supply chain processes that typically do. They are starting from your departments, but they're actually going on horizontally from supply to distribution. But it's also across different time horizons, right? Some of these are execution. Some of them can be planned for. But inherently, this is outside your 4 walls, right? And definitely outside the functional areas within the company. So that's one important message I want to get out. But if you ask what supply chain leaders like yourself, what is it that you really need to solve this, right? The answer has been, I think, for the last, so many years, it's been, I need more visibility. I need to somehow create more visibility. And they're right? I mean, unless you actually see what's happening in a relatively real time, or let's say not months or weeks later, you can still do something about it. But then there's a next angle to it. Collaboration, managing demand and supply volatility, ability to use data. I mean, this has been forever, right? Everybody talks about data. What does it mean? Is that enough? What do you need to get to the right data? I mean, you need to think of those paradigms. Executive understanding of the supply chain as well, right? I mean, we talked about how a supply chain is now getting more visibility because that's how you compete today, right? You can invest more sales and marketing effort. A lot of people are doing that. You can run more campaigns, but it's your delivery. Can you really deliver against your promises? Okay, I think some of you might have been familiar with this. This is essentially a simplified representation of a Gartner maturity curve, right? So they have defined 5 stages, starting more from how you react, more reactive companies where you're essentially just trying to get stuff done, to trying to do some planning, some anticipation. At this level, you're trying to be more integrated. You have some ERP systems. You're trying to be integrated within the 4 walls. And then finally, you're truly doing brand-level orchestration. You're trying to tell your suppliers what you need in advance. You're trying to ensure that the value chain is optimized. And of course, when you look at the capabilities needed, at this level, you need some people and some basic tools, maybe Excel. At this level, you need ERP systems. But if you think of what you need for this level, stage 4 and stage 5, just having an ERP or a CRM, these types of systems are not going to be enough, or even APS or advanced planning systems, because they're still looking at solving one local optimization problem, right? If you're really trying to orchestrate your supply chain, you have to look at stage 4, stage 5, which is essentially controlling logistics providers, or at least having direct communication with them, understanding what your suppliers are doing, what your contract manufacturers are doing, and so on, right? Okay, so the interesting point I would like to also mention is, if a company is here, sometimes they think I have to go through this journey, which may be, it's like, okay, if I'm here, I'm going to be there in 2050, so why bother, right? But I think you have to look at it in terms of an iPhone. At least that's what I believe. I'm an optimistic person. iPhones come in, and that completely changes the way you drive, the way you interact with the system. So it actually also gives you the ability, provided there's enough of a compelling event in your organization. Of course, it has to be like that. If there is a significant change to your business, if there's significant M&A, if there's management will, there are instances, and I'll share some with you, I hope, yeah, where organizations have made the jump from here to here, right? That's possible if there's a will and there's a sufficient business challenge, so to speak, right? These are the silos that we potentially look into which prevent it, right? So this is the classical architecture, right? We call it the spaghetti architecture, the nice spaghetti architecture. We have hundreds of systems. Sometimes there are literally hundreds of systems. Everybody talks about data, but it's all siloed. Sure. These are all functional things. It's basically, the data is siloed, latent, unharmonized, and disconnected, right? There's a point solution to everything that's going on. This approach, that's what makes it slow to change, because if you now think that, oh, I'm here, stage 2, I want to go to stage 4, I need to change all the boxes, and that's the thing that also holds people from a technology IT perspective. Even if you don't think about the change management aspect of it, right? I think now if I now look at an example, so if there's a company which is in the tobacco space, but you'd be surprised. I was certainly surprised. They say that our goal, our vision, is that we will make the world a tobacco-free world, and they're a tobacco company, so you may know what it is. Smoke-free. Okay, smoke-free, not tobacco-free. All right, thanks for correcting. Right, and what does that mean? I mean, this company now wants to. They used to sell these rolled-up cigarettes. Now they're essentially a completely different company who essentially have not e-cigarettes. These guys call it. It's Philip Morris, by the way. I was trying to save it, but yeah. Anyway, they call it a reduced risk product, right? So which is essentially a little cell, like a little battery, and there's it just heats a tobacco leaf. There's not much smoke. There's it's not good for you for sure, but it's less harmful for you. Right? Now, but what does it mean? Their business was very simple. Just get tobacco leaf, roll it in a piece of paper, sell it via the local tobacco shops. Right? Yeah. But now they're suddenly becoming a high-tech company. Right? So they had a big pressure to change. Like, okay, if I now go through this maturity journey, what does it mean for me? How long will it take to get there? Can I afford it? Right? So what they end up doing is something like this. This is again coming in from a technology angle. This is what they had earlier, what we call it an app-to-app architecture. Right? And what they replaced it, this is the system they are on now. Not all the boxes have gone. They are still phasing out a couple of these boxes. But they replaced it with an open connected platform, which replaces the point-to-point connections with your physical supply chain here, all the ERP systems, the CRM systems here, and then your entire supply chain, starting from, this one says supplier collaboration, this one says channel data management, right? So from the suppliers to the channel management in a unified open platform, and then what you can do is you can plug and play, essentially, right? You can put capabilities on top. So I'll talk a little bit about what does this architecture mean, right? And give some other examples with some other companies as well. Okay, so let's talk a little business. At the end of the day, why do you want to do this? If you're in the business, you want to take decisions quickly. You want to take the right decisions. You want to build alignment within the companies. You want to act quickly and profitably in the right direction. And for that, you need to be, you want to be able to do these things, right? So people talk about visibility a lot, but when you think of visibility, think of 4 things. The first is, what is my visibility really across? Am I seeing across the new ecosystems which I work on, right? So if you have contract manufacturing, if you have suppliers, how many tiers down is that going? Or if I have outsourced logistics, do I have that logistics ecosystem visibility? Or once I sell to my channel, what are the different channels? Do I have that visibility? So visibility means many things, right? So think of ecosystems. Think of what's the latency, of course. What's the visibility? When is it coming? Why is it coming? What's the granularity? Those kind of things. Bidirectionality, right? What does this mean? This means that if you're just seeing it, you're just seeing it. You don't have any way to make any impact. So what you really need is not just, there's a lot of buzzwords. I try to stay away from buzzwords. I hate buzzwords. But essentially, things like data lakes are great because they kind of help to create this app-to-app, replace this in one place. So yes, you're better off. But think of it as a data sink. It's not going anywhere, right? So what you really need for orchestration is kind of a bidirectionality where you can see. And then when you make an action, you can the parties who need to execute can execute, right? When you make a decision, maybe as a manager. Finally, it's also whether it's noise or insight. I talked about the truck being late. It's just noise. Unless you can correlate the data, the visibility data, from one end of the supply chain to the other end, it's meaningless. It's just noise. It's just going to make your day worse. So visibility is great, but you have to think about it again. Of course, once you correlate this, you have to understand the business impact. You have to understand what does it mean if I take one decision in one way. Does it actually cause a ripple effect? Maybe I see that the way I'm modeling my costs, am I actually modeling the all the costs? Or am I just, again, doing my local optimization and I'm just looking at it? Sometimes that might be OK, right? But you have to be aware that there are potential domino effects in your business. And then finally, it's can you act better, right? I mean, that's what we want to do at the end of the day. You want to take good decisions using right information, right insights, but we want to improve in the future. So that's why I say now and in the future. So you do want ideally some kind of learning capabilities, right? Because you don't want to, it's not Groundhog Day. You don't want to start the same thing exactly what you did the day before and then again the next day. So ideally, you want to actually get better and better over time. You want to take decisions which are aligned across different companies. If you're in sales or if you're in marketing, that story you've heard it before, probably today as well. And then finally, once you actually make a decision, let's say I'm an executive manager, I make a decision. I want my planners to do this, my campaign managers to do something. I want my supply guys to do something. Is that decision communicated to them in the right time frame? Because if not, by the time they took the decision, it's too late to actually act. And that decision is probably not relevant anymore. Right? So these are just some of the things to think about in my mind. But if I come back to what do you need to enable this, right? Because these are just problems. And problems are great because it helps us to see things in our world. But if I now look into it from how can you really enable this from a technology angle, we think that you need four things to do that. Right? If you have just one or two, you cannot do this. You need all 4. So if you have these 4 elements, then you have a framework to be able to do this type of orchestration. Right? That's essentially where we're coming from. So what are those 4 things? The 4 key things which we believe, the first one is the network. This is all your ecosystems, your ability to actually transact with them, understand them, communicate with them, right? And this could be across demand, supply, logistics, but also your internal silos, right? You absolutely need to be able to connect to them, right? Because if you don't have that communication layer, you can't do much. Data is second. It's not, some people start with data, which is fine, but how do you get to that data, right? You will only get data from a network. But essentially, once you actually get this network data, you need to kind of build it together. You need to create a model of your supply chain. So we call it a digital twin, but this is, again, another buzzword. But it's essentially the way we will approach it is we create a data model which represents your supply chain. That's what it is, right? It's a digital representation of your supply chain and your supply chain processes, right? But you need that in order to be able to do any kind of orchestration across internal and external. The third one is, of course, brains. Now you could put more horsepower, more people into it, or of course you could bring more intelligent applications into it, right? But the way I think of brains is it's really reducing the cost of decision making, right? And from a technology perspective, we have seen a lot of nice things going on in this space. So the brains of these days are better, faster. But you need brains, whether you try to pull it from your organization, from your people who actually understand the business practice, or you have a good, smart machine. But in any case, you need brains. And then finally, you need to have, this is a huge problem, right? The unified user experience. Because everybody is working in their own system, their screen looks the same. You know, what's good for me, it's gibberish, it's Greek for somebody else. Essentially, what you want is to have all your participants participate in the value chain orchestration activities in a consistent way. It doesn't mean that everybody sees the same thing, right? But you need to have workflows where you can say, okay, here's a supplier, here's tier 1 disruption, and if I now have a supply problem, should I do an expedite, and then be able to communicate that with another procurement person and who actually makes a call, and then when the expedite comes, go back to the production manager and say that, okay, now you have enough stock ready because we did the expedite. So the idea is having the ability, because if you miss that, you can have people working in different systems, and then you're kind of back to square one, right, a little bit. So does that make sense? So four things which we feel are really needed. So what we try to do at E2open, and some of you may be familiar with, so we really started with the network. So this was us. This was us, actually, network and data for the first 15 years of our existence. Last 5 years, we've kind of doubled down on the brains and the UX. But this is really the starting point, because unless you have network and data, you're not going anywhere here. You can start from here. There are a lot of companies out there in the market who actually have great apps. And then they rely on you to provide the data, right? So we kind of flip it around. So that's our story is you need to actually start looking from the network, look at the data, and then have intelligent applications to make sure you can get the best value from there, right? So this is what it looks like. This is, of course, it wouldn't be complete if I didn't share what we are doing, right? So this is what we try to do. This is your physical supply chain, the customers. We like to start from customers. This is your channel. So maybe retailers, resellers, distributors. You have your internal or external warehouses. Of course, you have customs and export, import. You have 3PLs, 4PLs, freight forwarders, internal and external manufacturing, co-packers, suppliers. What we try to do is we have, let's say, a trading partner network. Think of it as nothing but a data and connectivity layer, right? So we essentially try to have a reusable mapping to any types of supply chain objects, so that you don't have to redo the same work. If you're connected to a supplier, if you're connected to a logistics provider, we can reuse that for somebody else. So think of it as a LinkedIn, right? When is LinkedIn or Facebook useful? These are classic networks, right? And we are more familiar with social networks than we are more familiar with supply chain networks sometimes. So networks are only useful if there's discoverability in there, right? So you can actually search for somebody and say this is a 3rd-degree connection or a 2nd-degree connection. And then you can say that I can now reuse, I know that this is the mapping, and then I can actually connect to this person knowing that this is the person, right? So what we try to do is to build a network which is reusable, which has discoverability, and then use this network data to create an integrated data model, which represents your supply chain. And then on top of that, we have certain applications, right? These applications are coming from what we call channel shaping, which is really understanding what's happening after you make a sale, right? It's understanding the data, the sellout, the inventories, the point of sale, but also how you can influence it. Let's say by running certain partner marketing incentives or certain marketing development funds, or incentivizing your partners in a certain way, offering rebates. So those kind of things, right? So the channel part, demand sensing, I spoke about this in the last SCL Hub, if you were there. Demand sensing is essentially a new way to predict demand, because at the end of the day, what you want to say is, okay, how do I now use that for better planning, right? So demand sensing kind of enables that better visibility into the demand. Business planning, your classic planning, but the way we look at it, again, is end-to-end. So we try to do optimizations, which is classic planning, but not just within the four walls, but also extend it further. So we try to do more multi-tier and multi-enterprise planning. Global trade management is something which is really trying to understand cross-border imports, exports, automating that activity. It's powered by something called global knowledge. So we have a ton of people who sit there and essentially capture all rules and regulations that are changing on a day-to-day basis. And within 48 hours, all the databases are digitized and it's updated. So when you're making an import or export, you at least have the best rules and regulations, and it's automatically cross-checking against those. So there's a lot of them, but the common theme is, of course, end-to-end. And of course, this is what we used to do for the largest amount of time, which is supplier management, right? Not just POs and shipments collaboration, but also running processes like, say, VMI, buy-sell, contract manufacturing, quality management, those kind of things, right? And then we have Harmony, which is essentially this unified single pane of glass that I talked about. So that's the vision that we have, but it's a reality in the sense that this is what we all can offer today. This is also meant to be an open platform, right? Because we're not arrogant enough to say that you have to have our demand planning or we don't talk to you. So this is meant to be like let's say, an open platform which can be punched out both bidirectionally again into this ecosystem. So if you have a different planning system, through E2net, it can take data in and then feed the data, make a decision and feed data back, right? This is the architecture that can enable that kind of a stage 5 model that we saw earlier, because then you can essentially take out plug and play rather than do the spaghetti connection, right? So that's the story, that's the vision that we have as a company. So Gartner some time ago was also coming out with something similar. They have a slightly different view of it. I won't go into this. It's not the time, right, to do that. But they have come up, and you'll have this presentation. So if you visit our booth, we are happy to give this to you. So Gardner came up with, okay, this is the reference architecture, and they think that this is what companies need to have in order to enable this, which looks very similar without going into, there's a multi-enterprise lane, there's a configure, optimize, response, and execute. This is how they think of time dimensions, strategic, operational, execution activities. And then they say a unified user experience. So it's like a one-to-one match, more or less. Some examples and case studies. This is Dell. These are some of the results they have obtained last 10 years working with us. This is how their architecture looks like. Now think about Dell. What does Dell need to do? Dell, you can go to the Dell website, and you can order a completely configurable laptop, like the one I have here. And they can deliver it to you within 72 hours, right? So what does that really mean? So how many components does a laptop have? Thousands, probably, right? And think of what it takes to orchestrate that kind of a supply chain, and also think of the tiers in the supply chain, because there is somebody who makes a CPU, but the CPU, there is a chip inside, which is made by Intel. Intel procures some transistors from some other company. So it's many tiers deep. So in order to be able to profitably promise on the customer orders and orchestrate that, Dell has to go 4 or 5 tiers deep to understand how this demand change influences the supply chain and everything in between, including logistics. So companies like this are, they have a need to actually get the best of breed solutions out there, right, from a technology standpoint. And these are just some of the results. This one I find also pretty interesting, right, because they retired a lot of those point-to-point IT systems over time, over the last 10 years. Okay, this is Google, right? So Google sells software, of course. Well, they don't sell software so much. They sell devices. But yeah, they earn a lot of ad revenue and so on. In order to run their software, they need data centers, right? And Google has some of the largest server farms out there, right? Data centers out there. What does Google do for orchestrating that their data centers, their server farms are always up and running, right? They have to make sure that parts are available, there's backup, there's disaster recovery. So they use our platform. They replaced it to connect to these multi-tier suppliers, contract manufacturers, 3PLs, data centers distribution to something like this, right? This is a different representation, but it's the same concept. To have a single platform where you can plug in capabilities, an open platform across the board, right? And internal and external systems. Okay? Okay, so this was more about how we see the future of supply chain coming up. I did want to touch a little bit about around what we see in terms of the talent and how we see the organizations changing. And I really brought this up. I saw an interesting report from McKinsey where they're saying that, okay, anything that requires physical and manual skills or basic cognitive skills, those skills are actually not going to be in so much demand anymore. Why? Because this can be easily automated, right? You have robots these days, and the physical manual labor, the price for that is lower, and it will keep on lowering. Basic cognitive skills as well. It's easy to automate. You can put in a business rule, and almost everything can automate that these days, right? You can put a business rules-driven automation. So McKinsey thinks that the hours companies spend in each of these buckets of types of jobs that people do, so these two are going to be much lower. So it's going to fall by 14, 15%. But if you think of higher cognitive skills, right? Now you have to, social emotional skills, and of course technology and interpreting data skills, right? That's going to be the skills of the future. If you're looking for talent, if you're looking to build the next generation of supply chain, you have to think of what the industry of tomorrow looks like, right? And this one is particularly interesting, right? Technological skills is going to go up by 55%. So people who are comfortable with new technology and who can understand and connect what's happening and take decisions from technology. So you have to be iPhone ready, basically. That's what it means. Okay. No, but the other interesting thing was more around supply chain, right? Now, of course, there's a generational change happening. If you think of what millennials, I'm a millennial, but I'm at the border almost. So if you think of people like me and what they want from jobs and life, it's different from what the previous generation did, right? So what they want in terms of opportunities is also different. It's something to think about as you build the new supply chain organizations of the future. So, yeah, and why is that relevant? Because technology is not the answer, right? We've heard that many times. That's true, and also there is a cultural change required to do that. So, which is going to happen? So, it's more like how we prepare for it best. Okay, so here's another example. This is not 2030. This is again the present. Back to the present world. I keep dragging you guys to the present sometimes. So here's a company called P&G. I think P&G was speaking earlier today as well. I missed it, unfortunately. Oh, hi. So P&G, this is a very specific use case called on-demand automation, right? So what P&G is doing, and this has been not today. It started 10 years ago. This part is called IDF at P&G. This is essentially near-term demand automation. What is that? Think of what's happening. What will I sell this week, next week? How do you make that decision? If you think of what will I sell this week or next week, you look at last year, what I did in the same time period. Is that really relevant? It's like buying milk. If you want to buy more milk, you think of how much milk I bought last month. Do you think that? You simply open the fridge and see, okay, this is the amount of milk I have ready, I have remaining. I may have kids coming or guests coming, so I need to buy more, right? But that strategy works really well for the near term, what I want to buy now, the next week. So what P&G is doing is, there's some animation here, sorry. What P&G is doing is they're automating this near-term intelligence based on what customers are ordering, right? What's happening at the point of sale. And they're saying that planners don't touch the forecast for the next so many weeks. Right? So think of it as an automation of something that people used to do. A lot of companies are still grappling with changing near-term demand and reacting to a large order and then saying, what's happening with my promotion? So P&G is taking a radically different approach and saying that, okay, this part can be completely automated because it's just about consuming all the data that's available, promotions, point of sale, orders, and our forecast, of course, right? And then let the supply team have visibility and a better picture of demand. But they're doing the same thing on the long term, right? Because this happens also 3 years out. Does anybody have a very good understanding? People are making guesses. So what they're saying is, for the very long term is also something that can be completely automated. So where people focus their attention is in the midterm, where they can still influence, where they can run certain campaigns, they can talk to the customers and influence that. It's not like they're not using any forecasting here. This is completely manual. But this is almost completely automated with short-term demand sensing and long-term demand sensing. So my point was very simple, right? So that the technology is changing the way companies are working even today. OK, so without buzzwords, it's hard to do a technology and supply chain presentation without buzzwords, bringing in things like blockchain. It's not like they're not relevant. I think they're relevant. It's just maybe not the right time or not the right use cases, I think. But I really think that, OK, we have to think design. What do I mean by design is let's think of what we really want to do and how we want to orchestrate what do we need to do. So if we start with replacing each of these boxes in the supply chain IT landscape, it's not going to work. So we have to kind of reinvent it. The second thing is, OK, everybody talks data, but you have to think of data where it comes from, what it means. Closed loop and converged is the way I think about how do I first take the best decision? Is it based on recent data, or is it based on weeks, month old data? And then if I take a decision based on that information, is that being acted upon? So that's why we always think closed loop in terms of decisions, operations, and how it's executed. And then finally, we think, OK, if you're doing something now, if you're investing in a supply chain or the next generation technology, think of what you want to do today, but also what you want to do in the future, and how you can create a future-proof, open environment, which you can then run over time. OK, so I think that's all I had. So I hope this was somewhat interesting. Didn't put everybody to sleep. But I'm still around near the E2open counter, so happy to take questions anytime. Thank you.